of you, and this is going to be some history on the League of Women Voters. And what I am going to do is, since Elise is in the hospital and cannot be here, I found a little piece of information on that Artie wrote, and I'll read that. And then Betty, you have something to say too, right? Okay, and Elise is in the hospital because she has pneumonia. Last night I didn't know what room she was in, but she's in Providence Hospital. And then of course Lou had a heart attack a couple weeks ago, so, and I think I've let most of you know.
How's she doing?
She's resting and taking care of herself, which is what she should do. And so she was worried about not coming today, and I said, don't worry about it. We'll manage. We managed when we didn't have Warren here, but we're glad he's back and visiting us. Okay, I'm going to read some of the. This is called a capsule of the history of the EMCO League, and as I read it over, I think Polly wrote this, or not Polly, but Artie wrote this on the 10th anniversary, thinking back. And so I don't know how accurate it is, but I'm pretty sure that she knows, she knew.
She was there.
Yeah, she was there. Okay, this is it. It's a 3 Portland League members. Artie Johnson, a member of the Portland League, Unit 7, from 1957 to 60. Othea Young and Nita Rude asked the state board for help in starting a new league in East Multnomah County area, as they felt the growing pains and problems were different out here, and a separate league was very much needed to tackle them. The original 7 met at Sarah Riley's home in Gresham and were told at the first meeting we needed 15 members to start, until the state board discovered the unincorporated area's population and then raised the requirement to 50. So at the Multnomah County Health Building on Southeast 122nd in March 23rd of 1960, we had an organizational meeting at which we more than met the required goal, and Mrs. Lawrence, Nita, I found that everybody was referred to as by their last name or their husband's name, and I had a heck of a time figuring things out here. Served as the first provisional league president, and we began our Know Your County study. And that Know Your County study is over here on the table, first table, and you can look at it, but don't take it. That belongs in our archives. We also took a public opinion poll concerning the future governmental structure forward in the unincorporated area in East County. The 4 choices were annexation to the City of Portland Corporation, with the tri-counties and supplying area-wide services, and city-county consolidation. And that was the city-county consolidation went forward. Our beginning effort in Tri-County Area League study resulted in the publication of the Tale of 3 Counties. In April of 1961, the first annual meeting, Mrs. George Casterline became president, and we completed the required challenge of Know Your County study in a record 18 months period. And in November of 1961, were granted full league status from the National League of Women Voters, the first local league in an unincorporated area. In 1962, we held our first candidates fair and published the first vote paper with Portland League. In 1963, Mrs. Charles Levine was elected president, and we began pursuing a study on county home rule charter in March of 1964. A charter commission resolution was passed, and Mrs. Damskoff,
That's good.
a member of EMCO and past president of the Portland Lake, served as on the Charter Commission. Also in September of 1964, the EMCO League did the juvenile justice study. It resulted in the need for a community college in this area with a vocational technical emphasis. So, and in December of 1965, the voters passed a levy to build a community college in this county. Mrs. Jack Sanders was elected president in April of 1965, and in May of 1966, a home rule charter for Multnomah County was assessed by the voters. Then down here it says in 1965 to 1967 we had many league members serving on boards on the Metropolitan. Mrs. Ainsworth, Mrs. Margaret Gibbs, and Mrs. Ralph Carter. Betty Roberts is the name you probably remember. She served on the state school board, a state representative. Mrs. Leaf Anderson served as a school board chairman. I am going to skip some of this because it's hard reading here, and it takes us through some of the many things that they did in the tax study, the finance drive, and how when we stop and think of a finance drive, that is something we couldn't do. And the consensus and development of the Parks and Recreation study that was started with Betty Stewart. Now, this organizational meeting that she was talking about, I'm just going to read it. It occurred March 23rd of 1960. And Mrs. Rood was the temporary chairman. And there was a brief overview of the pre-organizational meeting by her. And a call for showing of hands to indicate membership, discussion and adoption of the bylaws. And I have never found those, and I hope I do. And the presentation and slate of officers and board members, and the explanation and standards of the Provisional League. And then we have a proposed budget. And would you believe that when this first started, 1960 and 1961, they were paying $3.50 for league dues. I about fell over when I heard that, or when I read that. An introduction to the league publications, and the meeting was turned over to Mrs. Young, who was a temporary membership chair at the time. There are some other things in this book, and I'm going to put it over here on the first table for you to look at, but I'm not going to read it now. I'm not going to go through it. We have other people who have things to say. We're going to cover the Krilo League, our first president, EMCO's first president, Gladys Pazel, and then you have some things to say too, Betty. Okay? So I'll give you Betty Cornelison right now.
I've often moaned because we have made so little progress since I've been a league member. It's been 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. But I sat with Laurie Monis Anderson at our brunch. She was bemoaning the fact that there are only 23 women at the legislature this year. I joined League in 1968. Does anybody know how many members we had that year? I couldn't find out exactly, but I believe it was 2. So we, some progress somewhere has been made. Some of the studies have helped elections keep elections somewhat fair, and improved voters pamphlet. Remember when the pictures of some of the people running for office were when they were 30 years old, and at the time they were running for office, they were 60. You know, and their education was college degree when they took 2 classes at Mount Hood or an equivalent place. So a few things have been improved through that. Some studies have helped the ongoing campaign to use less and recycle more. Oh, that Betty Stewart, I owe her a pop on the nose every time I think of it. I was a brand new member and she says, well, why don't you take the natural resources study because there won't be much to do. That was the year of Earth Day. Oh, piles of material came in to me. But we actually did do a few things, and I think what we did was get other people to be single idea organizations to push these things along as well. So we started studies that nobody had done before. You know, the smoking study, I can remember going to a meeting with a couple of other groups. One of them was, what do you call it when they're about the lungs? Anyway, emphysema and that sort of thing. One of them was to raise money to cure. I sat at a table with one of the founding members, and he smoked a half a pack of cigarettes while we were at the table. So, you know, a few things have happened since I have been a member. But let's find more about our league in specific. So Shirley Luttrop is going to talk some about Polly Casterline and the period when she was president.
Thank you, Betty. Well, I have been a member of the League of Women Voters of East Multnomah County since 1965, and how I became interested. I have always been interested in politics, but never had an opportunity to become involved. And when Polly Casterline became president of League, well, it was probably about 2 or 3 years into her presidency, there was a big article in the Outlook about Polly and the League of Women Voters. Well, our family was going to her husband as our dentist, and I had an appointment about the time this article came out. And so when, before he started working on me, I said, I saw the article about your wife and I'm really interested in that. He said, I'll give you my card, you call her at home, you know, and she'd be delighted to have you come. That's when it started. And I've been a member ever since. The Provisional League president was Mrs. Lawrence Rood, followed by the election of Mrs. George Polly Casterline. And again, as has been mentioned, all the records show the women's names as Mrs. And finally, I noticed about 4 or 5 years later, it began listing us by our first names. So I think that too is progress. During those early days, Polly, her husband George, and many members of the newly formed league were active advocates and worked very hard for the successful establishment of Mount Hood Community College. It rapidly became an important addition to East County and remains so to this day. After serving 2 terms as league president, Polly went on to serve 2 terms as president of the State League, followed by service for the National League on nominating and budget committees. Her interest in and support for the League of Women Voters did not ever waver nor diminish. In 1986, following the resignation of Gordon Shadburn, that's a whole nother story, she was elected to the Multnomah County Board of Commissioners and served in that position until her passing in 1989. Her other interests and involvements included 8 years on the board of Mount Hood Community College and boards and commissions such as the Livable Oregon Committee, the Edgefield Lodge Board of Directors, the Metropolitan Area Local Government Boundary Commission, and the Downtown Loaves and Fishes Steering Committee. And Polly was also one of the founders of the Farmers Market here in Gresham, which is still a thriving activity. In 1987, she was given the White Rose Award by the March of Dimes. Polly's selfless dedication and service to the League of Women Voters and the citizens of this local area and the state of Oregon earned her tremendous respect, and her example has served as an inspiration to the many women who have known her and oftentimes followed her pathway into public service and politics. I'm very pleased to have known and been associated with Polly.
And now we have Lorraine, who's going to talk about another era.
Well, in the 1960s and 70s, 6 local leagues went together and formed the Metro Committee. And they addressed all the regional issues. All 6 local leagues had to agree on everything. So if anything was being changed, they had to go back to each league and get their approval before they could move forward. Those 6 leagues were Portland, East Multnomah County, MCO, Washington County, East Washington County, Clackamas County, Columbia County, and Clark County, Washington. And then about 1980, and this was a little sketchy as to exactly when Krilo was formed. Finally got hold of Sherry Finnegan, who was the last treasurer of Krilo. And she thinks in about 1980, the Columbia River Interlocal League Organization, Krilo, was formed. And that was with equal representation from all the leagues. And the reason for that was that Portland had gotten very large. They had about 350 members and were dominating everything. So MCO along the way was very instrumental in having Krilo formed so that we had equal representation. And most of the time we've had someone on the Krilo board. Anyway, some of the studies and positions that were adopted through Krilo, well, through Metro and Krilo, were the promotion of orderly metropolitan government, supporting a multi-purpose special district with power to enforce its decisions with adequate and equitable financing. And that was adopted in 1967, revised in 79 by the Metro Committee, and in 1992 by Krilo. And 1992, Krilo adopted the position on metropolitan government, supporting Metro with services and functions, Metro Washington Park Zoo, solid waste management, Oregon Convention Center, Metropolitan Exposition Recreation Facilities, transportation planning, surface water runoff coordination, planning and development, and information assistance to local governments. Of course, this has been through the years. Other studies and positions also included urban growth boundary, metropolitan transportation, TriMet, Port of Portland, and solid waste. So I've covered a big area. Due to the lack of participation of Columbia County, they disbanded. And that was in 2010, I believe, this last year, that they disbanded.
So did Washington County.
Pardon?
I said, so did Washington.
Washington County, well, we lost a lot of them. Washington County, East Washington County, Columbia County, Clark County was only active for about 2 years. So they kind of fell by the wayside, but lack of participation forced the elimination of Krilo. And even when it was changed to Columbia River Region, most everybody still called it Krilo. It was easier. Then I was asked also to talk about Unit 2, but kind of going back, I found information from 1980, and there were 5 units. There was Unit 1, 2, 4, 5, and 8. I don't know how they came up with the numbers. That was before my time.
There originally were 8 units.
There were 8 units. That was amazing. In 1978, there were 59 members. In 79, there were 90 members. In 1980, there were 82 members. Anyway, kind of interesting. Unit 2 was actually in force when I joined, and looking back through my bulletins, evidently I joined in 1978. Anyway, it's just an interesting process. In September 30th, 1982 was the origination of the couples unit. And that was during Ruby Hudson's presidency. And I was secretary at that time, and I know I went to that meeting, and it was great. There were couples that would go. Couples had diverse interests and opinions, and they would argue during those meetings, and as soon as an hour was up, it was shut down, they had refreshments, and it was social hour. And it was great. Just wish we could get a couples unit going again. Also, I was asked to talk about Marge Scandrett. She was one delightful lady. She was a retired teacher. She taught over an American school in England and Germany. And she was a crusty little gal that she had so much spunk. It was fun. She questioned everything. If she said she was going to do something, boy, she got it done. She loved League, absolutely loved it. She brought in quite a few of her friends into League, and she finally moved up to Welch's and built her chalet, which was a cute little house up there. And when she died, she left money to MCO, and that's where the Marge Scandrett Foundation is, and the money was to be used for educational purposes. And we still haven't used it all, which is
Yes,
amazing.
we did. Yes,
Have we?
yes. This year we
Okay.
finished it with the directory of elected officials.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's very good.
She was like that.
Yes, and she was a delightful lady.
You know, the formation of the couples unit happened because the National League finally allowed men to become full members. Before that, they were associate members. And the ones who were involved in our league, when I first joined, had their names listed over the side of the page in our bulletins and in our letters and so on, and they were our advisors. But actually, what they advised us was how to get money out of other people who did business with. So they were helpful. Anyway, so now Kathy Minden is going to give us some information about Betty Stewart and so on.
I've only been a member of League perhaps over the last 10 years or so. And as I'm sitting here listening to the history, what a privilege it is to be among such wonderful people committed to their communities. What a privilege. And such fun to hear the history. I've heard little snippets of it, but to hear about the personalities and all the back and forth that it takes to build a democracy, because that's what we're really talking about today. So it's my privilege to be a part of this. And Betty Cornelison had mentioned about Betty Stewart, and because I didn't know Betty well, I asked some of the members and others out in the community who also knew Betty. And to talk about Betty is to talk about her husband, Sed Stewart, because where one was, the other was. So, and I did have an opportunity to meet Sed at some of the community meetings along the way. Parks were a major passion. Betty always pushed for parks and was one of the original founders of People for Parks, a nonprofit organization that is still continuing to this day. And it formed in 1976. Through their efforts, they were instrumental in establishing park assessment fees, and they were able to obtain some money out of the then housing boom from the baby boomers' early years, for the 70s and 80s. So they were able to obtain parklands, and they were set aside for future use. And I related to what Betty said about Betty Stewart talking her into doing the beginning of Earth Day, because that was what everyone told me to accomplish what Betty Stewart had done. She was very energetic, she knew lots of people, and she got them out to do things. She was always smiling, and she was always talking. Now, some other key people that Betty and Sid worked with that are familiar names to League as well were Betty Shadeen, Marv Ogle, and Ed Robison. Mine is fairly brief, but I think the news that we have to share, because sometimes I think in League we say, oh, we're studying this again, you know, and you wonder, you know, how the progress is being made. Well, over the years, the League, we would continue to update, and we retain the emphasis on parks. And a seed planted, a seed nurtured, comes to fruition and be harvested. Betty and Sid prepared a foundation for the community to later build on. And I'm going to pass some information out so that you can see that as of just yesterday, that President Obama released the final report of his America's Great Outdoors Initiative, AGO, and during its public listening that they did around the country, that they heard how important our urban green spaces, how important they play an enormous role in Americans' everyday experience of the outdoors, and about green space and parks, that this initiative is going to play an important role all across the United States now. So it's pretty exciting, really, that the League of Women Voters planted that seed, and it was continued to be nurtured, and we have been able to play an important role in making the yesterday happen. So I'll pass that out so you can see that. And because there are different aspects of recreation, People for Parks is continuing to advocate policy and advocacy for parks and recreation. And there also is now Senate Bill 291 that will have a hearing in Salem this Thursday about after-school recreation. And I know we've all heard how much money is there for education on a daily, just keeping education going on a daily basis. Well, there are opportunities in after school that make sense and that can be provided for, that will provide enrichment, especially for kids who are in more challenging situations, and will bring them more, so it's more equitable for education. And I will pass this out as well. So these are the things that are going on because that seed was planted, and we've been able to continue that emphasis and bring this to fruition. So not only did Betty and Sid do everything possible for parks, but they were also as passionate about the development of Mount Hood Community College. And when that was mentioned earlier, I had this flashback memory of being a senior in high school, junior I think. And we were, in our classroom, we were debating over names for Mount Hood Community College, what eventually came to be chosen. I was trying to remember some of those other names that were, that the kids we came up with. But it was Mount Hood Community College, and how passionate they were to make that happen as well. So to conclude, I was thinking, what would be the best way to describe Betty and Sid? And I thought the best way to leave a memory, and I attribute this to Lorraine sharing with me, they did everything good imaginable in the community. And I think that's true of the league as a whole. Thank you.
Betty was enthusiastic. That is how she got people to do things. And now, Gladys Faisal is going to talk to us.
How about Alice Pratt? But I'm talking.
Oh. Alice Pratt's going to talk to us about Gladys Faisal, her mother. Okay.
I love it. I'm happy to be called Gladys.
All right.
Give me an hour and I'll get up there. Just one.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. I am Alice Black. And number one, I wanted to say how wonderful this archive is. Whoever is responsible for this, my goodness.
I think maybe we could take a minute to thank Bonnie Reeves for a lot of it.
Yes.
She has done a lot of work on the albums.
That's terrific. I wish I had, hours. Where is this going to be after this meeting?
With the president.
Because I would love to have the opportunity, no way to go through this in today's meeting. Anyway, that's terrific. And number two, this may not be appropriate, but since Lorraine mentioned Marge Scandrett, with reference to my mother, it brought up, and I've told this before, but I think it's, at any rate, Gladys Faisal smoked all her life. There was no question. She smoked. And she developed a serious cough near the end of her life and a diaphragmatic hernia and all those things. So when she came to live with us the last 10 years of her life, number one, I didn't want my children to be afflicted with secondhand smoke. Besides, I wished her health to improve. I wished her cough to diminish and all these things. So I told her no smoking in the house, and we wouldn't buy any cigarettes. And she was very good. She said, that's right. And I have to say, her cough improved over the years, so my story this may not work. But then she had several small strokes, and she was in the hospital once, and Marge and several other league members came to visit her. And she was lying there, and lots of conversation, and Marge finally said, Gladys, you can't die. You owe me too many cigarettes. And over all these years, I'd been taking her to the meetings. I sort of knew this was happening, but I looked at her and I could see how terribly uncomfortable she was. Anyway, number one, I want to thank Betty for asking me to do this. I've lived with my mother, for what? Until she was 87 and I was whatever that was. And so I knew a bit about her, but I have to say I didn't know much. In fact, I knew little about her activity with the League. We had several Outlook articles, one of which I noticed was back there, two of which I had, and I read through, but they're not very specific. They give a lot of fun quotes from Gladys Faisal, but not much specific. So you're not going to get, all your other talks have been very specific and edifying. You're not going to get a lot of that from me, but I will give you a bit about her past life, which I know something about. And, oh, and the other reason I appreciate it, I don't know how to Google, but a couple of my sons do know how to do that. So because I wish to get past information, they Googled my mother's name and my father's name way back to the 20s, and wow, I have learned so much. I'm recommending it for anyone else who wants to find out about his or her predecessors. It's amazing. And use any name you can think of they might have used. My mother, as somebody else mentioned, they were using, husbands' names way back. So if you look far enough back, you look for Mrs. Lawrence Pazel, and you don't look for Gladys Larson Pazel. But wow, this was edifying to me to see. I had learned more about my family in the last month than I've ever been aware of. So anyway, I'm recommending that. Now maybe I'll get on with this. And any of you who knew Gladys Pazel, you probably heard the story that, and it's a true story, that when I was 3 months old, she was pushing me around in a perambulator and was stopped on the street of Canton, New York, in North New York State, St. Lawrence County, way up on the St. Lawrence River. And someone asked her to join the League of Women Voters in 1932. And my understanding, suffrage happened in 1920. When did the League, was it about that time?
Yeah.
that the League of Women Voters? Okay. So the League was 10 years old, maybe a little more. And I don't know whether my mother knew anything about it or not, but she went home and spoke to her husband, my father, Lawrence Pazel, who was then the chair of the economics department at St. Lawrence University. And she quotes him as saying, "That's the best organization in the United States." And I thought, remember, that was the early Depression. That was an economics major, a teacher at a university. And he said, yeah, you gotta join this group. It's the best organization in the country. So I thought we all ought to be aware of that. And she joined, and we Googled the local paper, the St. Lawrence Plain Dealer. And not only did she join, she was the first president. She started being president in 1932. It's amazing. But, at any rate, I thought you ought to know that an economics professor was lauding the League in the early Depression. And that's a significant matter. Okay. And the other thing I do remember about my childhood in Canton, New York, was that the New York Times, and I don't know if they still have, every Sunday had 20 questions with reference to current events. And our Sunday dinner was long, prolonged discussion and answering the 20 questions in the New York Times about current events and politics. And I got the best social studies grades in grammar school because my mother and father spent Sunday with me answering all those darn New York Times questions. And it was wonderful. I loved it. But I won't fill all the middle ground. Any of you, I did write some notes to myself here. In the interim, many things happened, but my mother moved several times. And you all may have known she had many interests. She was a teacher. She taught all the way from, well, she started being the radio workshop director at St. Lawrence University. And then, I shouldn't say down, then she taught high school, then she taught elementary school, and she finally taught the mentally retarded. So she had vast experience. She had many other interests, her Swedish background, her church, just many things. But every time she moved, and it was only 3 times, but every time she moved, the first organization that she looked up was the League of Women Voters. And she joined. It was her life. In fact, I was going to give a title to this thing, and I think the title was Total Lifetime Commitment. And she really It was her life. This was the most important thing in her life, this organization. Then when she came to Oregon in 1969, again, she looked up the league and joined. And I'm sorry, I should have gotten more specifics. I know a few of the things. I was kind of busy, and I should have known more about exactly when she was doing what. But she did serve as president at least one term. Does anyone know? Well, I'm sorry, I don't know. And Betty told me she was chair of the study committee on Oregon taxes. She did many ballot measure studies, and actually served in much the manner I think that Susan does. She was very clear and knew a great deal about the ballot measures. One article back there from the Oregonian has the quote that I couldn't resist. She took the league phone for a couple of years. And one of the articles back there says during one pre-election, the couple of months before the election, she counted one day and had 91 phone calls.
Oh my gosh.
And I thought maybe she counted, I don't know, that might have been an exaggeration, but she said 91 phone calls on a day. And in view of the fact that her housekeeping and my housekeeping have much in common, one of her comments was, I stepped over the dust to get to the telephone. And I thought, boy, did I understand that. But anyway, if anyone else has any other, I may have written down some other things, but she participated, I remember, in many meetings regarding the East Max. Do any of you remember that? She had a friend or an opponent friend. Does anyone remember his name? I remember she would come home and rant a little bit because he was on the opposite. She was promoting the East Max and he was in opposition. And I wish I could remember his name. If anyone has it, I'd love to get it because they had a friendly animosity.
Well, McIntyre and Dennehy were opposing everything at that
Right,
point.
but this was another fella. Anyway, I'd like to know, but I'll find it. And I have a couple of articles that I haven't seen here, but maybe I'm wrong. I will be happy to share copies of the articles that I have. And I'm sorry Elise is not here because she tells the story quite frequently, and I trust she's doing okay. But she tells the story of my mother working in her basement, putting on stamps and,
Yes.
setting up the mailing list when I guess my mother was prez or something. And she was really impressed, and she asked my mother, why do you do this? And my mother said, it's gotta be done. And that was the way she dealt with everything. If it was there to be done, it didn't matter what her position was. If she had time, she did it.
Alice, I remember the first league meeting that your mom attended. It was the Friday morning local league meeting, and this self-confident woman came in the door. We met at the Gresham United Methodist Church. We had childcare then, and anyway, this wonderful woman came breezing in, and she said, I am Gladys Pazel. I have just moved here and I want to join. And needless to say, we were all, just awestruck. And she was so knowledgeable and so outgoing. I truly learned so much from her, and she didn't let anything stop her or slow her down, and total commitment, and I feel very privileged to have had that experience.
That's nice. She will have had, 40 years of experience prior to arriving in Portland. Yes, there was a lot going on. So thank you. I appreciate your mentioning that. And what else? Oh, I did want to Well, there were a couple of quotes I thought were typical. She said, "I can't be more busy. Isn't happiness being occupied?" And that was her
Yes.
philosophy of life. Do something, be involved. And total of almost 16 years of life with the League of Women Voters, lifetime of interest and activity. And I did want to say also I appreciated whoever established the Gladys Basil Citizenship Award in 2006. That I don't know if I've ever said thank you to you all for doing that. That's very nice. And I had some kind of a final sentence here. I guess I said the Gladys Basil Citizenship Award probably was recognition of a lifelong loyalty to and confidence in the League of Women Voters as and possibly the most effective organizational asset to our democratic process to achieve intelligent citizenship and informed voting. And that was really of utmost importance to her. Thank you very much.
I remember Gladys as somebody who could teach you something about taxes. We did studies on Oregon tax structure, and I can barely add 2 and 2. So she was really helpful. She was able even to explain it to me. So
She
was a
majored
good
in
teacher.
math, I think, if I recall.
did she?
Yeah.
Now, at this point, we were going to collect questionnaires, but we forgot to hand them out. So we'll just hand questionnaires out, and
Yeah, you're on.
and if Marlene is ready to adjourn the meeting, then we'll just go ahead and adjourn it, because we have to get our questionnaires into state next year. Actually, we don't have to get them in this year, so.
State wants the questionnaires of each, and particularly the people who have just spoken and some of the other people. There are questions on there that they want to ask you, we should ask you, the younger people should ask you, and you should fill out, and state wants this so that they can put it together for the suffrage movement celebration next year.
90th anniversary.
That's what all this history is about. They're asking all of the leagues to do this. We have some copies made, and they'll be over here for all of you to take one.
Are those
With
the
each of the
interview
questions.
questions? that
Those
came
are
up
the
on-
interview
okay.
questions, yes. Some of you have them and some of you don't. But I want to adjourn this by saying, hey, I'm glad all you came out here for International Women's Day and appreciate this day and are going down to Salem today and being there at 5:30 to hear our Secretary of State and Barbara Roberts and Betty Roberts, many other dignitaries kick off the suffragette movement for next year. And we'll adjourn the meeting.